Welcome to the Mile High Flight Show, where a Jets fan and a Broncos fan get together to talk about the NFL and the world of sports. I'm your host, Ryan Marinholtz, joined as always by my wonderful co-host, Enrique Cisneros, and let's jump right into this. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing good, bro. Just excited to talk to you again on this beautiful Sunday and excited to get into it today.
Absolutely right back at you. So we'll jump right into it with our weekly questions here. The first one, how many yards will Zach Wilson throw for in 2022? We went from 2,000 plus to 5,000 plus and on Twitter and Instagram. You guys chose 3,000 or more yards, which I think is pretty fair. I mean, he's got some new weapons around him. You talk about CJ Uzama, he goes to tight end camp, and then all of the wide receivers you already had. Hopefully, Braxton Berrios takes a step forward, and then you add in the draft as well, Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State. So, I think for me, 3,000 plus is on the conservative side. I think if everything goes right, he can get 4,000 plus. 5,000 plus might be a reach, but plausible. If everything goes perfect for you guys, he has a hell of a season.
Yeah, I think 5,000 plus is, I mean, I'm not saying it's like impossible, but it is on the very unlikely, in my opinion. I think he's going to be sitting somewhere between if I want to give you like an accurate stat line on it, I would probably say I think he probably throws for like 38.92 or something. Like real close to 4.
Yeah.
If he does break 4, it'll probably be like 41, something along those lines.
Yeah.
But I mean, I agree with your points completely. The fact that he does have so many more weapons to throw to. I think that he's going to have a equal running game as well. I think our running game is going to be very efficient, and that's just going to open up even more for him because teams are going to have to account for us now. Before you could almost say they didn't have to really worry. I don't know. I don't know what teams were worried about last year with us. Maybe our passing game a little bit more. I would say that we were slightly more efficient passing the ball than we were running the ball sometimes, but it kind of varied week to week. So I'm not sure what teams were worried about last year, but this year for sure. I mean, we got fucking Michael Johnson. Oh, Michael Carter, yeah, running the ball behind Breece Hall. And I mean, I don't know why Breece hasn't signed his contract, but once we get him signed up, we can get him focused on football, get him playing. And I really do think that with the passing pieces that we already had in Corey Davis and Elijah Moore, Braxton Berrios, and adding the new guys, I really do think that things are just going to blossom and flourish. I think that Zach Wilson should definitely look to be on the reward end of that. I mean, low key, I'm gonna pick him up in fantasy football this year. I'm gonna pick up a lot of Jets actually, which is surprising because that's not usually something you say when it comes to fantasy football. But I mean, Zach Wilson could be a nice pinch starter depending on who he's playing. Breece Hall, maybe Elijah Moore. I don't know if I'll go with the rookie Garrett Wilson on fantasy, but he's going to be nice in real life. So we might. Jamar Chase was nice his rookie year, so I'm expecting Garrett Wilson to give me a Jamar Chase year next year.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few options there that you could pick from. Tight end CJ Uzama, and like you said, the weapons are already there. And Zach Wilson, they're set to even the running back. Shit, I mean, they're set to have a good year. You know what I mean, and a positive year. So I think that's totally reasonable. And then the other thing we wanted to bring up when we're talking about Zach Wilson here is, I heard there's a little bit of news going on around him.
Oh yeah, dude, Zach Wilson, crazy. So my boy's a meme right now because and I heard that this is all rumors. It might not be true, might not be true. So maybe we shouldn't address it, but it is hilarious. So I do have to bring it up. And I mean, we're a Jets show partially, so it would be a disservice to the loyal Jets fans if we didn't talk about Zach Wilson being a little drama. So apparently, it was a story throughout the summer, or getting into the summer from spring, that Zach Wilson had broke up with his longtime girlfriend. Then he was spotted with some other chick. And I try not to get into the tabloids part too much, but I mean, he is the quarterback of the New York Jets, so it just kind of comes along with it. And so now, I guess that said longtime ex-girlfriend started sleeping with his best friend and his college roommate, and just his wide receiver at BYU, like his boy. I guess they got together. They had posted some like picture on Instagram, and then homeboy made her delete it. But I guess that all stems because I'm not sure exactly. I've heard two sides of it. I heard it's either it was that dude's mom or just a friend of his mom's. But my boy Zach is he's a cougar hunter. Like my boy either banged his homeboy's mom or banged his mom's homeboy, which is crazy. Because like if you go back and look at and I know this, I hate to get into this, but it is so fucking funny. Like it is so hilarious. But if you go back and look at like some of the memes that Zach Wilson was in beforehand, they were all like making fun of him because he looks like a virgin, like he just looks like even that draft video where they show everybody all lined up and then you just have like little white boy Zach Wilson just like in between these two massive dudes. Like
a little baby
he's like such a dude, like he's just such a baby. He's such a cute little dude. And so when you hear hilarious stories like this, and the memes are golden, dog. Like the memes are gold. Like I know you don't have a Facebook, but I swear, I was scrolling through Facebook earlier today, and the memes are golden. And to have the Jets be in like a cool, funny meme instead of like the butt fumble memes, or I mean, like, come on, the Jets are always on the ass end of all the jokes, But I mean, we're like a top 3 losing team, losing franchise in the NFL. I would say like us, the Browns, and the Jaguars.
Is
that fair?
Some sort of combination of those, but I mean, at the end of the day, at least you guys have a Super Bowl win. That's more than a lot of teams can say. So
the Chargers can't even say that.
Yeah, I think they had like Super Bowl appearances against the Joe Montana 49ers, I think even. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, fucking Zach Wilson, like you said, this is a good time in Jets football. You guys are on the up and up, and even the memes are on the up and up. It's a lot of the time the memes, like you said, the butt fumble and stuff, it's with the Jets are more negative, where this is just kind of just funny. Like it's just funny. And it's totally, like you said, almost tabloid stuff, but that's kind of when you're in New York-ish, New Jersey, but still like that New York kind of PR, everybody's under a microscope sort of attitude. Like he's got paparazzi following him around and figuring out his relationship status. So it's pretty funny, but definitely had to bring that up for the memes. And our next weekly question here, which NFC East team will win the division? Obviously, we're finishing off breaking down the division here. Started last week with the Giants and the Eagles, and then this week we will be visiting the Washington Commanders and the Dallas Cowboys. But on Twitter and Instagram, you guys chose the Philadelphia Eagles to win the division, and I mean, I think that's reasonable. I think, we'll get into it later, obviously, going through the Cowboys and the Commanders, but I feel like both of those teams and the Eagles all have some sort of stake for the claim there, or claim for the stake when it comes to leading the division, and if not, at least being a wild card playoff team. But I think all 3 of those teams have an opportunity to grab it for sure. I think the Cowboys, I would put, for me personally, I'd put at the top of that list in terms of roster strength and like coach strength, quarterback play strength. I think Cowboys are number 1. I think I would say Eagles and then Commanders, and then obviously Giants at the bottom. What about you, Enrique?
Um, I to me, if I'm being honest with you, the top spot in the division, uh, it has to be between the Cowboys and the Eagles. And if I'm being honest with you, Ryan, I'm gonna lean towards Philly,
Mm,
and that's just solely based on, I mean, doing the breakdown last week. I really obviously got in depth with their roster. I got to see who was on the team, and I really do feel like CD Lamb had a bit of help, and this is going to be the first. And I'm not saying that he didn't do his thing and prove that he's capable of being a number one wide receiver, but he had help with Amari Cooper. And so
mhm.
to me, this is the first year of seeing how CD is going to do. When he is the true number one wide receiver. And I mean, obviously, we're going to get into it in just a bit, but there's just certain spots on the Cowboys roster that are a little thin, where I think the Eagles have filled in some of those thin roster spots. We talked about D tackle, we talked about corner, and they didn't just like fill them in with like third level, second level guys. They filled them in with like premier players at those positions.
Mhm.
Jordan Davis, coming out of Georgia, huge prospect, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And then yeah, exactly. And then to get James Bradbury from the rival Giants. I mean, I think that's not only a move for the team and the roster, but a team for the locker room too,
Yeah.
because that guy's going to come in there when they play the Giants and be fired up and get his boys going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially if it's a cap room situation, like you had said it was. It's like, and we've talked about it on the show when the Eagles signed him. Like you could have figured it out for him.
Yeah.
So I just think with all those reasons, but I will give you this: the quarterback play is the biggest factor. Um, I think AJ Brown is better than CD. I think Miles Sanders and Ezekiel Elliott. I think Zeke's better when he's healthy. Miles Sanders is shown not to be as healthy, but Ezekiel Elliott has also had injury history the last few years as well.
Yeah.
And then even more so, the number 2 wide receiver, Devonta Smith versus Michael Gallup.
Yeah.
So that's just going to be a little tough. But the Dak Prescott versus Jalen Hurts argument is the one that you have to hang your hat on. And I do think that Dak's the more established quarterback right now. He has shown more right now, but I think Jalen's going to continue to go upwards. I'm betting on Jalen's upside on maximize the potential of the Eagles. So, yeah, in a long roundabout way, I got to go with the Eagles.
I think that's really reasonable. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's totally reasonable to say any of those three teams, when you're talking about the Commanders, Cowboys, and Eagles, have uh, a claim for it. But I think to your point, the Eagles not only have established veterans, but they have young guys there developing when it comes to your quarterback. And you have a veteran wide receiver, but also a young one that's still developing, has that history with that quarterback. You know what I mean? They've added players in their spots of need. And although some of those players are young and may take some time to develop, there's a really solid base around them, and brought in some other vets too. You talk about James Bradbury, and filling up that secondary. And I think that's totally reasonable. And I'm super excited. We've talked about the Eagles a ton this offseason, but I think honestly it's because they've got so much positive going on and so much momentum heading into like throughout this offseason heading into the season, of a lot of really good moves and really intriguing moves. So we'll just have to see how this division ends up playing out. But we were talking off the air where, like, for the last few seasons, maybe not last season, I guess, but for recent history, the NFC East has been viewed as a little bit of a weaker division, and a lot of those teams were kind of rebuilding. And now you're really legitimately looking at three potential playoff contenders, and the Giants they're figuring things out, but I don't know that they're going to be a huge factor this year. And I just think that those three teams all have a chance at it. But I'm, Cowboys or Eagles, I think, are the top two, but you're almost convincing me on the Eagles being the top one, and that's who you guys chose as well. So But with that, we'll get into some of our news here. Mostly NFL stuff this week. Not a whole lot going on when it comes to the NBA. Most of those big contracts and things in free agency happened just kind of in a big chunk right there. So, but for our NFL stories, the biggest one this week, Baker Mayfield traded to the Carolina Panthers for a 2024 conditional fifth-round pick that can turn into a fourth, depending on how Baker plays. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton to talk about with this move. We've talked about the Browns a lot. I know I have a particular opinion on this one, and I mean, I feel like my positioning on it is I feel like this was the best move for Baker because he was legitimately wronged, depending on how you look at it, by the Cleveland Browns in the way that they went about this. And I think that you talked about like him playing injured last year, and some will say that they put that blame on Baker for playing injured. I think there's a certain level of that where at some point you yourself need to pull the plug and be responsible. But I also think that on the Cleveland Browns part, there's blame to be laid in. They need to recognize, and the fact that they have the doctors telling them it's like, he's injured. You should go to your backup option for his sake, long term, and for the team's sake, because it wasn't a good option for him to play. You know what I mean? So you could talk about that all day, but I think that a fresh start was the best option for everyone involved. And even though I heard a alternative opinion that would kind of like intrigued me of he was better off even with the Browns situation and the kind of nastiness there. He would have been better off staying because he would have gotten an opportunity to play with Deshaun Watson's eventual suspension and be surrounded by a better supporting cast than in Carolina. And with his 1 year left on his contract, would be able to put himself in a better light going into that free agency offseason and be able to pick wherever he wants and have teams want him. And the point they were trying to make is that in Carolina, you may have a worse chance at that because you do have an unproven and like on the down head coach when it comes to Matt Rule, potentially going to be fired this year if he doesn't go well enough, or if the season doesn't go well enough. And you do have less talent on the roster than the Browns. I think that's very fair to say, but I do think it was kind of underrating the Panthers' level of talent on that roster. But with that said, I'd be interested to hear your position on this, Enrique, and how you feel about what Baker's best situation would have been for him moving forward between those two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is Baker's best situation regardless, because, I mean, Carolina still has to give Baker Mayfield a contract, right? Yeah. And if I'm being honest with you, I think this is low-key a very strategic, move by Baker, because Sam Darnold doesn't have a firm grasp on that job. So Baker goes to a roster healthy now with a chip on his shoulder. And I don't know if you remember Baker Mayfield grabbing his fucking ball sack at Oklahoma, but when Baker Mayfield has a chip on his shoulder, dude, at plays like that, he plays fiery, dude. So he goes to a Carolina Panthers team that has enough talent to make a little noise. You got DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Christian McCaffrey. You have a stud defense. Offensive line leaves a little to be desired, but with and then they got my boy from the Titans. What was their running back's name? I feel so bad.
It's
that heavy
Foreman,
hitter,
Yeah.
But Deonta Foreman.
Yes, it's something like that, but I totally can't remember off the top of my head, unfortunately. But yeah,
I know. I feel so bad. He's such a stud, and Oh, go ahead.
Oh no. Well, I was basically saying exactly what you were saying. So go right ahead.
Oh yeah, just that he's a stud and he's an amazing running back, and we're terrible for not remembering his name.
He really is a stud, and that was a good addition for sure. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Is like that. I do like to just look at alternative opinions, just to obviously filter out and say give yourself an alternative viewpoint to draw from. and decipher whether you feel that's fair. I do think in that particular case, they were underrating just how good this Panthers roster is. I mean, again, I do think that you can decidedly say that the Browns have a more talented roster on paper. But if that defense can really perform better than it did last year, and they have the talent to do so, and then you talk about that offense healthy with Christian McCaffrey, you have some backup options if they can balance that running game right and keep Christian McCaffrey healthy. And having a capable passer is going to be almost the best thing for Christian McCaffrey, because you talk about it's almost the same situation in New York with the Giants, where you have a potential, not even potential star, a star running back. When you talk about Saquon Barkley, you talk about Christian McCaffrey, but their usage is so high because they don't have a reliable passing game. And so not only are they running into packed boxes because the defense basically knows they're going to run the ball, because there's no passing game. You know what I mean? Like, it just makes their life harder, on top of the fact that they're already being used more because there's no passing game. And so now that Baker is there, and no offense to Sam Darnold, but I think that you can clearly say that Baker, in my opinion, obviously other people feel very differently on just what Baker is as a quarterback, but in my opinion, I feel like Baker Mayfield is a clear upgrade. And if he doesn't show in camp that he is the starter, then you've got an issue on your hands. You know what I mean? Like, if you're having an actual quarterback battle because Baker hasn't separated himself, then I think that you have an issue. But one other thing that I wanted to bring up real quick before I toss it back to you on this topic was that because they only gave up, it was a conditional 5th round pick that can turn into a 4th. This is not a situation where you've traded multiple 1st round picks for a Russell Wilson, and so you basically are required to pay him, and that the player almost has leverage on that contract. The Carolina Panthers did not give up enough that if Baker comes out and isn't what they wanted him to be or what they hope him to be, that they can move on without a whole lot of headache. You know what I mean? And he's only got the 1 year left on his contract, so it's basically can you be our future? If not, bye.
Right, and I love that you bring that up, because I was actually going to bring up the opposite point of that. I was going to bring up that honestly, like, this really works out for the Panthers too, because I'm a big Baker Mayfield guy as well, and so I think that if Baker comes in, does his thing, like, maybe I forget what we predicted the Panthers to win when we broke down the Panthers, and I feel bad for that, but I don't necessarily think, even with Baker Mayfield, that they're going to win more than 10 games. I would have to go back and obviously listen to our show where we broke down the Panthers so elegantly, which, if you haven't heard it, you can just go back and listen to it, then you know what I'm talking about. But if Baker fulfills his portion of it, he just becomes the franchise quarterback of the Carolina Panthers. He gets a giant contract. He already has, he kind of low-key in a more fortunate Sam Darnold situation, because I think he is coming into it with more talent than Sam. And I think that he's coming into it with a roster that's settled. And I think that he's worked with just as much in Cleveland before they really rebuilt around him. Before they rebuilt for Deshaun Watson. And also, this is like karma for the Browns. You don't get to give Deshaun Watson the most guaranteed money in NFL history and then him not get suspended. He's going to get suspended all year, in my opinion. That's just what's going to happen. So, Baker moving on is good for Baker and his family. It's good for the Panthers, I think, because I think Baker's going to come in and do his thing, and they're at least going to give him a 3-year contract, in my opinion. I think a 3-year contract, even if Baker's mid, you know what I mean, is worth it, because you can, maybe you're not getting the best draft picks, but you can still get draft picks to rebuild a team. You have a guy that can win you some games, maybe get you into the playoffs again, depending on how the strength of the schedule. But I think this is a knockout for the Panthers, especially for a 5th round pick. So I think this was a home run trade, and I think the Browns really, really fucked themselves. Because if I was Browns, honestly, as bad as it sounds, I probably wouldn't have traded Baker Mayfield. Probably would have sucked him off so that way I didn't have to trade him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like from the Browns' perspective, certainly if you can have your cake and eat it too, and go into the season with Baker Mayfield, while you're waiting for the Deshaun Watson situation to settle, I think that that's the best case scenario for them. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's human emotions there and human stuff going on. And I mean, I think if the Browns were more foresighted about it, they could have approached the situation differently. But the way that it happened, I think, is really what led. And Baker Mayfield is one of those fiery guys that will easily kind of like the Michael Jordan, like, oh, I took that personally. He's kind of one of those guys to an extent. And so I think that like there was a certain level of like this was always going to happen in if you're pursuing Deshaun Watson. But I do think that they could have handled it better if they were honest about the situation and like, hey, we're going to upgrade, but we want you to stick around. You've got 1 year. This dude is probably going to get suspended. So, I mean, stay here, do your thing, and then we'll send you off in free agency. Like, if they approached it like that, I think maybe it's a different story. But I think because of, at least for how it looks from the outside, we never know those private conversations or how it went down all the way. But it seems pretty clear from like both sides how they've publicly handled it that it did not go that like well. So yeah, I think that this is the best move for all involved. And also the last thing to bring up here before we move on, the Browns and the Panthers play in week 1. So that will be a very, very tasty game, a revenge game. You're talking a couple of those now. You talk about not revenge necessarily, but Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos heading back to Seattle in week 1, and then also Baker Mayfield and going against the Browns with the Carolina Panthers, and probably the Deshaun Watson-less Browns as well. So he may even come out on top there if they can, figure it out quick enough in Carolina.
Yeah, and even more so, I'm pretty sure that the Browns have to pay him like money to play them.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be even better. Yeah, dude, like week 1 in the NFL is a banger right away. You got Russ playing the Seahawks against the legendary Drew Lock, and then you have Baker playing the Browns. I wonder if Baker's gonna get a new commercial though.
Oh, he's got to. I'm sure they've got it.
You think so? You think like even though they traded him, you think that they can still do it?
Well, they'll probably do like I can see it now. They'll do like a moving commercial where he's like got all the boxes and he's bringing them into like a moving truck. I guarantee you that's going to be what it is. Like they can't just not take it.
Damn. I need that. I need that so fucking bad.
Right?
I need it so. I didn't even know I needed it, but now I need it so bad.
Now you need it. Yeah, exactly. But exactly like Carolina Panthers, they didn't know they needed Baker Mayfield. Now they got it. Now they need it. So we will see how that goes down in Carolina. But our next NFL story here, Falcons signing a steady veteran in Eddie Goldman, defensive lineman, to a 1-year deal. Obviously, at this point in the offseason, we're not talking about any groundbreaking moves or anything. But, a solid move by the Falcons to shore up that defensive line. Obviously not expecting a whole lot out of them this year necessarily. But, it never hurts helps your run game, helps your pass game. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on the Eddie Goldman to Falcons move, Enrique?
I think this was a move that was pretty necessary for the Falcons as they look to just try to get some talent on that roster. You know what I mean? And maybe Eddie Goldman's not going to completely solve everything, all the problems that they have, but he goes down to a system that I think Eddie Goldman can really have a impact in. I think because he's a bigger nose tackle type guy. So I think that he'll go down there and be able to find a home. He is following Ryan Pace down there, who is the GM with the Bears. So he's going at least into some familiar faces.
Good
And
catch.
yeah, and then even more so, he's got Grady Jarrett, to play behind, and you know, it's only going to help the defensive line. Obviously, it's kind of like the Solomon Thomas move with the Jets. So it's one of those things that it just, familiar faces. Um, the team's got a need for it, and yeah, it's good. It's a good pickup. I love it.
I agree. Yeah, I love that detail you added. I did not realize that connection, but makes a lot of sense. And then our third story here, Justin Houston agreeing to a 1-year deal to return to the Ravens. And yeah, I mean, kind of similar to Eddie Goldman, you're looking at a veteran filling in that spot for now. Not going to be amazing, but he's going to be a solid body there that won't mess things up. So, yeah, pretty happy about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. The Ravens just have this knack of really nailing their free agency signings, and exactly what you said. Justin Houston's gonna bring that nice veteran presence. He's already been a Raven for a little while now, right?
At least a year or two.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think Justin Houston still has. I've always really been high on Justin Houston. I know that obviously Father Time has dropped his production a little bit, but I think for the type of role that you're looking for with him on that Ravens defense, I do think that he's a very nice pickup to get back with them. And yeah, I love to see these guys I've seen play forever keep getting opportunities to play. So yeah, congrats to Justin Houston.
Absolutely. And then our next and final NFL story here this week, Las Vegas Raiders hire Sandra Douglas Morgan as team president. She represents the first Black female president in NFL history. Douglas comes in after Dan Ventrell was fired after reporting concerns of a hostile work environment to the NFL, and the Raiders chose not to comment on Ventrell's allegations, though the league is looking into them. But Douglas, in her introductory press conference, mentioned that she's not here to sweep anything under the rug or avoid problems that need to be addressed. So, a little bit of a tumultuous situation over there in Las Vegas. But I mean, you got to at least, tip the cap to the first Black female president hire in NFL history. Some groundbreaking broke there. And as we've talked about, I mean, the Raiders have historically been on the forefront of the league in a lot of those types of moves. So, obviously, congratulations to Sandra Douglas Morgan. And yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how that goes. You know, I mean, you just hope that that gets resolved because you never want a hostile work environment for anybody. But yeah, the kind of details around it are just a little eesh. But, you know, there's positives and negatives. So, what are your thoughts, Enrique?
Yeah, if I'm being honest with you, I'm not trying to sound like I didn't know what was going on, but I don't know what's going on with the Raiders. I didn't hear about this guy, um, you know, having these comments about the Raiders at all. So I'm very interested in getting those scoop. Might have to really dive into this, but I don't want the negatives of the story to take away from the outstanding positive to have the first Black female president in the NFL. That just such a there's just such an astounding thing to happen, especially in a time where, I mean, if I'm being honest with you, the NFL is getting sued right now, by a former coach, and over racist concerns. Colin Kaepernick for a long time, had, and I mean, we can go on and on about the cap situation for sure. I know that you feel strongly about it, and I do as well. But there was concerns in regards to Colin Kaepernick that maybe there was something to do with the way he protested, and so to see a colored person in this position is amazing. As a father to daughters, to see a woman in this position is amazing. And yeah, it's wholeheartedly something that I'm just very, very glad to see. And even more so, my mom and my grandma are Raider fans, so
Oh, wow.
they're able to, they're able to kind of, be a part of that history, by just literally supporting their favorite team. it was now going to be, under heavy influence by, a colored woman. So yeah, I love to see it. I love to see stories like this, and especially when someone gets an opportunity to really make an impact in such a profound way. So yeah, I really hope that she's able to do her thing. I hope that the stuff that comes out about the workplace is able to get figured out, because it would suck to put her in such a tough position right away. But I'm sure that she's up for the task of taking care of whatever the Raiders need her to take care of. So congratulations to her for sure, and yeah, I just hope it all works out.
Absolutely, yeah. Very well spoken, Enrique, and a lot of great points. And it's one of those situations, like you said, where you don't want the negative cloud around it to outweigh what a monumental, uh, point in history this is for the history of the league, and all of that. And so, uh, we are just congratulating her, and we hope that like she said in her introductory press conference, I was very encouraged by the words spoken that she, like, because she even said when she was approached about the opportunity, she was obviously very excited and honored, but had questions, and was very skeptical when it came to some of those things. And totally to your point, during this offseason, it's been crazy because there really has not been a lot of talk about it. And I want to say it came out, if it wasn't during free agency, it was somewhere in the mix in the offseason and just kind of got swept under the rug a little bit. And so, it's almost a good thing in a sense that that's now being brought back to light. So maybe people that didn't see it the first time are seeing it again. And hopefully, the NFL is looking into it. But like you just talked about, they're being investigated for, what's going on in Washington, as well as what's going on with Brian Flores and his, uh, lawsuit as well. So just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of moving pieces. But at the end of the day, congratulations to Sandra Douglas Morgan, and a piece of history there. So yeah, and then with that is going to do it for our sports news section this week. And we'll move on to our breakdowns, starting with the Dallas Cowboys. Enrique, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I was super excited to break down the Cowboys. I have tons of Cowboys fans in my family. So I was, I have an Ezekiel Elliott jersey, but that's mostly because I liked him coming out of Ohio State. Anywho, so the GM of the Dallas Cowboys is obviously Mr. Jerry Jones / owner. I still think that if I owned a football team, I would Jerry Jones the fuck out of it. Like,
oh, for sure.
I would be in that shit. I would be fucking holding pads for guys. Like, I would be fucking out there. I would, dude. Like,
no, I would.
Are you serious?
100%.
So the fact that yeah, exactly. The fact that Jerry gets to be the GM is cool. So yeah, Jerry Jones, GM, head coach Mike McCarthy. Now, I don't know. The playoff disappointment that the Cowboys have to face sometime, especially last year after such a very good season. I mean, the Cowboys had a really good year last year. They had, I think that Micah Parsons won Defensive Rookie of the Year, if I'm correct. So that's a very outstanding accomplishment. They made the playoffs, and they ran into Deebo Samuel and Jimmy Garoppolo, and it just be like that sometimes. So I'm not sure exactly how everyone feels about Mike McCarthy. He is I don't know. I do think that he has to get some stuff underneath his belt down there in Dallas to keep his job. I don't necessarily think that he's on the hot spot yet, but I think another a season without a playoff win would look very bad for him. So I guess we'll see what happens throughout the year. But the Cowboys, regarding at least team building wise, I think they low-key really nailed a lot of their draft picks. So getting into their draft class, in the first round, they took offensive lineman Tyler Smith. The second round, they took defensive end / linebacker Sam Williams. In the third round, they took Jalen Tolbert, a wide receiver. Fourth round, they took a backup tight end, Jake Ferguson. And then in the fifth round, one of their many fifth-round picks. I like when I was doing the research for this, I did not believe how many fucking picks the Cowboys had in the fifth round. Like, it just like reminded me of Madden when you just like randomly have like fucking 8 sixth-round picks and you have to like trade all them shits. The Cowboys just said, "Fuck it, we're gonna take somebody." And I mean, that's what the draft's for. You know, you throw as many darts as you can on the board and hope that one of them sticks. So, but one of the first of their many fifth-round picks was offensive tackle Matt Waltzico. I don't know. Everybody knows. I just fuck up everyone's name. If it's not like Jake Ferguson or Zach Wilson, just a very easy name, I fuck it up. So, sorry, Matt. But second of their 4 fifth-round picks is going to be Deron Bland, a corner. Then they went with linebacker Damon Clark. See, and that one was easy too. And then defensive tackle John Ridgway rounds out their fifth-round picks. And then to round out the draft class entirely, they doubled down on a linebacker and got Devin Harper as well. A few notes of the draft picks. Obviously, you know, you're hoping that your first 3 guys, rounds 1, 2, and 3, those are your, you know, either like meaningful snaps, like they're playing a large percentage of snaps for you, or they're a starter. You know, you want those guys to, you know, contribute right away. And I thought the Cowboys' first 3 picks, they really did nail it. You know, in my opinion, Cowboys fans may have a different opinion. I think, you know, the big boy over on the left side is getting a little old. He's had not like tons of injuries in his career, but, you know, Tyron Smith is getting up there in age. And so you have to eventually look to replace him at left tackle. Not saying that you need to do that right away, but if Tyler Smith can come in, learn underneath him, and even more so, he plays tackle and guard on the left side. So he just adds tons of versatility and adds depth in case something does happen to Tyron Smith. And it has happened before where the Cowboys have been without him for an extended period of time. So I think it gives you balance. And I think the one thing that the Cowboys really did very, very well was constructing that offensive line on the low key. You know, they took Zach Martin and, you know, obviously it started with Tyron Smith, but then they had the run with Linnell Collins, that's part of the Bengals now. You know, just so many guys that have really, they've just been able to slide guys in and out on that offensive line. To keep the talent level there, you know. And so I think the first round pick, Tyler Smith, you know, he can play guard, he can play tackle, gives them a backup at tackle in case something happens with Tyron. And, you know, he might start at the left guard spot, right guard spot, just kind of depending on what's going to go down in the season. Obviously, Zach Martin's got his job locked down, being an all-pro himself. So, but that's the guy you get to learn under. You get to learn under Tyron Smith. Like, one thing about the Cowboys, I think they have a knack to develop offensive linemen, especially of the late years. So I think that they nailed it with this first round pick, especially when, I mean, you could have argued that they could have took a wide receiver. I'm not saying that there was like a good, or not a good one, I can't say that, but, you know, they could have took like maybe a Zeke replacement in the first round, maybe a Breece Hall even, or a safety. The Cowboys are always in need of a safety. But ultimately they took the safe pick, and I thought Tyler Smith was a good one. Now getting into their second round pick, Sam Williams. I love this pick as well, just because they're adding another pass rusher to develop along Micah Parsons, and he's learning from DeMarcus Lawrence. You know, a lot of guys on the Cowboys staff right now is comparing him to DeMarcus Lawrence and to DeMarcus Ware. You know, so they say he's a nice hybrid in between there. Lots of speed and explosion. You know, just has good size, good pass rush. And when you have a guy like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, you can really allow those other guys to sneak in there, shine. You know, so adding a second round pick with such, I guess, what would you call that? Like a high enough ceiling that can kind of like sneak in there and get those sneaky sacks, get those numbers that, are kind of missing, from like a third guy. And also giving them, some depth behind DeMarcus Lawrence, because he's missed time before as well, so I really do think that the Cowboys nailed it in their second round pick. And then with their, my last pick that I want to point out is that Jalen Tolbert, the third round pick, the third round wide receiver coming out of, I think it's Southern Alabama, something like that, real small school. But the Cowboys didn't see him as a small school guy. They said when they saw him at the Senior Bowl, he, matched all their expectations. The lights weren't big enough for him, or too big for him. And, he's just a high motor guy, high football IQ guy, high effort. And I think that, honestly, he has the opportunity to really fight for a meaningful spot on this Cowboys roster. Obviously, you want your third round pick to do something right away, but I really do think that he can provide like quality snaps right away, especially with a thinned out depth chart with Amari Cooper being gone. Everybody gets pushed up once, and if you can, rise to the challenge, like you can take a spot. And I don't necessarily think that Michael Gallup is this elite, talented wide receiver that's going, like, he's not beating CeeDee Lamb for the number one job, but he can possibly slide in there for number two, number three, and, really, really do something for his offense, especially with Dak Prescott. He's just always been able to find other wide receivers while still giving his wide receiver one love. So I really do think Jalen Tolbert, Sam Williams, and Tyler Smith are going to play big roles in the Cowboys team going forward. And I think that this was a perfect way to start getting guys in that rotation and start developing guys for prime positions that you're going to need later. A thing that I heard the other day, because I've been on that Jets Flight 2020, is it's actually an Ozzie Newsome thing. Ozzie Newsome said it. A luxury pick today is a need tomorrow. So the fact that the Cowboys were able to add three quality players with the top three picks, and then add, lots of special teams guys and guys that, have some high upside in the later rounds, especially with those 4 fifth-round picks. They had 9 players altogether coming into their draft class, and I think they added real quality guys. So I'm excited to see what happens. But speaking of adding players to their roster, we'll get into the Cowboys roster a little bit. So obviously quarterback number 1 is going to be Dak Prescott. I got Cooper Rush backing up Dak. Obviously I'm hoping for another stellar year out of Dak. I love to see him come back and play at a high level like he did this year, especially after that injury. So yeah, love to see Dak back. And then I got Cooper Rush backing him up. Getting to the running back 1, we got Ezekiel Elliott, obviously. As long as he comes back healthy, he's going to lock the spot down. We got Tony Pollard, who's an awesome change of pace back. Honestly, Tony Pollard sometimes outshines Ezekiel Elliott, depending on the day. He's viable in special teams. He's viable in the passing game. And he adds a nice change of pace to Ezekiel Elliott's violent running style. But I am hoping to see Zeke back in tip-top shape. The Cowboys do run a fullback. That's going to be Ryan Nall. And then to back up Tony Pollard as running back 3, we got Rico Dowdle. Getting into the wide receivers, obviously wide receiver 1 is going to be CeeDee Lamb. Then I got James Washington, Jalen Tolbert, Simi Fihoko, Noah Brown. And yeah, I think ultimately the big question to me on the wide receivers is if CeeDee Lamb's going to be able to really establish himself as the wide receiver 1. I'm not saying that he can't do it. I don't know. I think I just have my doubts a little bit because I haven't seen it quite yet. He's put up real solid numbers with Amari Cooper there, but without having Amari there to take that heat off of him, I really would like to see how CeeDee Lamb performs with the opposing defense number one corner on him. And I mean, the nice thing is, and we'll get into the tight ends real quick. They have Dalton Schultz, who's a premier tight end. I think he's an up and coming tight end. I think he's gonna be really, really good. The Jets were very interested in him coming into free agency this year, but the Cowboys re-signed him. So getting into their tight ends now, Dalton Schultz is their tight end one. Jake Ferguson, the rookie, obviously is going to back him up, and then Sean McKinnon is their tight end three. So I mean, I just mentioned Dalton Schultz a little bit. Very up and coming tight end, very nice receiving threat, got good size, and so I think ultimately he's going to make big noise this year. I'm looking for him to have a big season, but then I think that the rookie is going to be able to add some quality snaps this year as well. Picking him in the 4th round, not a bad spot to get a tight end. Even if they missed on some of the bigger names that got taken in the 3rd round, still a very solid tight end. I'm excited to see what the Cowboys tight end room brings. Offensive line, we'll get into at left tackle. We got Tyron Smith backing him up, and taking over right tackle duties is going to be Terrence Steele, and then their swing tackle is going to be Josh Ball, and then their left tackle number 3 is going to be Matt Walazico, the rookie. Right guard 1 is going to be Zach Martin. Right guard 2 and left guard 1 is going to be Tyler Smith. The swing guy for the interior right now is Connor McGovern, which good luck with that. We had Connor McGovern last year. Center 1 is going to be Matt Farnoak, and then backing him up is going to be Tyler Biadizis. And then getting into their defensive side, we got left end 1, DeMarcus Lawrence, and then over on the other side at right end, you got Dorrance Armstrong. Backing up Dorrance Armstrong is going to be the rookie Sam Williams. Backing him up at right end 3 is going to be Dante Fowler, and then backing up our left end, DeMarcus Lawrence is going to be Chauncey Golston and Terrell Basham. Nose tackles, we got John Ridgway, the rookie, Quentin Bohanna, backing him up. Defensive tackles, we got Osa Odijizua.
Wow, that's a hard one.
Neville Gallimore. Dude, super hard, right? Odijizua. Yeah, I mean, this is
Cool
the best
looking
one.
name.
Yeah, it is a cool looking name. The Giants actually have a dude like under like the same name influence on their they're on the other side of Kayvon Thibodeau. So
Oh, dude.
yeah. Anyways, defensive tackle number 3 is going to be Carlos Watkins. So that's going to be their defensive line group. Linebackers, you got the stud Micah Parsons. Their rundown linebacker is going to be Leighton Vander Esch. Pass down linebacker is going to be Jabril Cox. Honestly, I'm surprised Leighton Vander Esch is still on the roster sometimes, and not because, I mean, his play has came down a little bit, but dude was hurt for like a good number of years. So I really I guess I'm surprised and low-key kind of proud of the dude for being able to stick on to the Cowboys. But it also, Jerry's been known to kind of hold on to guys that he likes, even if they kind of suck. But anyways, special teams linebackers, you got Luke Gifford and Devin Harper. Getting into their cornerback room, you got Trayvon Diggs, who I'm 50-50 on for sure, but he is their starter. And, I mean, he did have 11 interceptions last year, so it's pretty outstanding year by that regard. Anthony Brown is going to be cornerback 2, Calvin Joseph, Jordan Lewis, Nishawn Wright rounds out their top 5 corners. And then special teams, you got CJ Goodwin, who's going to be from the cornerback room, but he's probably going to make the team through special teams. So as far as their safeties go, They got Malik Hooker starting at free safety, Jerron Kearse starting at strong safety, and then backing those guys up is going to be Donovan Wilson, Israel Mukuhamu, and then Marquise Bell. And then to round out the roster altogether, the special teams, kicker is going to be Jonathan Garibay, punter Brian Anger, and then long snapper Jake McQuaid, which is a cool name. So the only thing I can really say about the roster is the questions that I have at least are, can this roster take an injury? If there's a big injury to Trayvon Diggs, how does Anthony Brown, fare as the cornerback one going against some of the wide receivers? And we'll see their schedule in just a second, but safety wise, Malik Hooker, Jerron Kearse, nothing against those guys, but those aren't, I wouldn't say like premier safety talents. I mean, linebacker, I think you're kind of okay, but I mean, an injury to Micah Parsons would be deadly. Like pretty much the Cowboys have like a solid starter or a star at most of their positions, but if they get hurt, they don't necessarily have the depth at all the positions to withstand a blow like that. So, I mean, I think the offensive side is a bit more capable of handling an injury than the defensive side is. But I mean, just looking at the starting 11 on both sides, you just have guys that I believe can really do some damage if everyone stays healthy. But yeah, I mean, ultimately that's what everyone says about the Cowboys every year, is if they could stay healthy, if they could do this, if they could do that, and not make noise. So I guess we'll just have to see. What do you think about their roster, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it, first of all, and I think you nailed the big questions too, is like, there is talent across this roster, pretty much across the board. They have a nice starting roster, but then you look at their depth and there's a lot to be desired, especially defensively, like you mentioned. And, in particular on Trayvon Diggs, I'm kind of right there with you. I'm 50-50 because, like, you think about somebody like Marcus Peters, who is a positive example of how that sort of play style can work. But in my opinion, I think Trayvon Diggs needs to do one of two things. If he's going to continue playing the way he did in his rookie year, he has to be consistent with the sheer volume, which tends to be like of the amount of takeaways he gets, which tends to be like a very volatile thing year to year. And so if you're missing that many plays and then you have a down couple years of the turnovers too, and you just don't get as many, then you're not in a good place. You know what I mean? So if you can improve on your general coverage and then still be able to pull off those sneaky plays and get those sneaky interceptions, then I think you're in business to be a year to year all-star freaking cornerback. But he's just got to give me that consistency. Otherwise, I don't know if he can keep up the consistency in the turnovers, and I think that would be a way that his career would maybe flame out. If that's
absolutely. No, and I agree for sure. I think that Trayvon Diggs is one of those. I think honestly, what was the stat that they gave for him last year? He allowed 1,000 receiving yards on him, just throughout the year altogether. And I mean, honestly, there was times where and that was like most in the NFL or second most or something. But there was times where dude did get burnt like toast. Like there was times, I mean, Broncos fans know, especially because they beat the Cowboys' ass last year. Like there was times where Trayvon Diggs was able to get exposed. And I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of his brother Stephon Diggs. But yeah, we definitely need to see some overall improvements from Trayvon Diggs, besides just the explosive takeaway plays, to believe that he's going to be a quality superstar corner. And I mean, I'm hoping, because dude, his son is adorable as fuck. Like
Yeah.
Aiden Diggs is so cute. So
Yeah.
I love to see those videos where he's like making fun of Dak Prescott. He's like
Yeah.
talking about his dad. He's like, "That's my dad right there. It's Trayvon."
I love it.
So yeah, I love to see that shit. So yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree to all your points. Thanks for bringing that up. So get into their schedule. Um, right away, week one, you got Tampa Bay coming into town, and I believe this is the first Sunday night game. Am I correct on that? I believe so.
Yeah, I think so.
So I mean, obviously, huge game right away. But I do think at home they have a little bit of an advantage, and I do think that they have enough talent to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I do think they take a dub. But then week two, they have another very stiff challenge in the Joe Burrow-led Cincinnati Bengals, and I think they actually lose this game, and that's only because I believe in the Bengals. Um, I just think that they have probably the most dangerous wide receiver core in the league, and I don't think the Cowboys have enough in their secondary to cover all those guys, in addition to Joe Mixon on the ground. So yeah, with that being said, I have the Cowboys losing to Cincinnati week two, but that's a big game as well, and I'll get into that in just a second. Week three at the New York Giants, I have them winning. Week four, Washington comes into Dallas, I have them winning. Week five at LA Rams, have them losing it. Week six at Philadelphia, have them losing it. I do have, and we'll get into it in a second, I do have them splitting the series with the Eagles. I think that the Eagles get the edge in week six just because they're at home. And then you get into week seven, which is the Lions. I think the Cowboys can beat them. The Bears, week eight, I think the Cowboys can beat them. And then their bye is week nine. Week 10 is going to be at Green Bay, which is going to be a huge game. I think they come out of the bye ready to go, ready to play, and I think that they take the dub. Then they go to Minnesota, and I think they win there. They get the Giants back at home. I think they win. They get the Colts at home, and I think that that's the biggest difference is that the Cowboys get to play this game at home, and that's why they win. But otherwise, I think that's a huge game as well. I have them beating the Texans. I have them going to Jacksonville and beating the Jaguars. I have them beating the Eagles. So, I mean, that, like I said, that's going to be the game that's in Dallas. That's why I think that the Eagles will lose. But that's a huge game because it's going to be week 16, probably going to be fighting for some playoff position, probably going to need this stuff to decide, who's going to be seeded or who's going to even get into the playoffs. And then week 17, you're going to Tennessee. I think they could still pull that off. But I can see a world where they lose this game as well. And then week 18, and this is a to be determined where it's going to be played at, but they're going to be playing the Washington Commanders, and I think they'll be able to beat Washington just based on quarterback play right now. I don't think that Washington has a better quarterback than Dak Prescott is. So right now, I have the Cowboys games. The Cowboys honestly only losing 3 games. I'm leading them at 14-3, but it also depends on how they play against these big teams. I think like the Tampa Bay game's huge, Cincinnati's huge, both the Eagles games are huge, the Rams game is huge, the Packers game is huge, the Colts game is huge, and that's just because these are the top quality teams. Like these are teams that are going to be potential playoff teams and or in the playoffs for sure. I mean, Cincinnati just went to the Super Bowl. Tampa Bay was a game away. The Rams just won the Super Bowl. Packers were knocked out of the playoffs. The Vikings could be good. The Colts obviously are expecting, honestly, to try to make a run for the bowl. So it's one of those things that, you have really tough teams. And obviously with you being an uber talented team yourself, you can compete against those teams. But if you lose all those games, it's going to be hard to, one, feel any sort of confidence having to play any of those teams in the playoffs again. And I think that the biggest key for this Cowboys schedule is to take advantage of their weak games. They have to win all the winnable games. Like you have to beat the Lions, you have to beat the Bears, you have to beat the Giants, the Commanders. You guys need it for sure. There shouldn't be any doubt in your mind that you could beat those guys, and those guys need to be beaten. And that should hopefully give you guys some confidence when you guys do have to play a more talented team that can give you different things that these teams that aren't as talented can do. So I think all the big playoff contender games are games to circle, like that Cincinnati and Dallas game. Game. I wish that Dallas had a little bit more in their secondary to add a little bit more fun to it, but seeing Trayvon Diggs work against Jamar Chase is going to be fun. And then Tampa Bay is going to be a huge game, and that's week 1. That sets the tone of the whole season almost. So they're really going to have to dig deep within themselves to get that one from Tom, because he's going to want to go in there and play spoiler, especially with the retirement, non-retirement. So it's very interesting. So what about what do you think about the schedule, and what's your prediction on their record?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like we talked about when it comes to winning the division with our weekly question there, I really do think you're talking Dallas, Philadelphia, and Washington to win that division. And Dallas has the most talented roster on paper, in my opinion. Obviously, like we talked about, there's an argument for the Eagles with some of the holes they filled and the depth that they have at some positions, especially as opposed to, like you just went through, the lack of depth on a lot of this Cowboys roster, kind of the top-heavy nature of it. But yeah, I mean, I think 14-3, and at that point, you're probably winning the division is entirely possible. And it's going to, you have them sweeping Washington. It's going to come down to games like that, where can Washington at least take one of those games and take a game away from that 14-3 record? Are they gonna be able to win against Cincinnati? Things like that, just all those big games that you went through. But at the same time, like you mentioned, it's not overall, there's quite a few not awful games in there. And so you have the big moments kind of sprinkled throughout, but it's not a totally just rough schedule from start to finish as some of these teams have. So yeah, I mean, I think 14-3 is totally reasonable, somewhere in that range. You're talking just depending on how things falls. I would say 11-6 to 14-3, anywhere in there would be pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the floor being 11-6. I think it's pretty reasonable. I do see the holes in that schedule, and so I'm like, you guys should be able to beat the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just don't play down to them. Don't turn over the ball, and we'll be fine. So that's why, honestly, I have them winning so many games.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you also mentioned, it comes down to injuries and whether they can stay healthy, especially with this top-heavy roster. If you take a tumble and maybe have some injuries piling up by the end of that season, and a lot of those easy games that you're expected to just get that giant win streak and fill up your win totals there right at the end, from week 7 through the rest of it, week 7 through 18. I mean, if you're all injured by that point in the season, not all of those wins are a given anymore. Especially you talk about the Packers, talk about the Colts. Maybe even the Vikings can make an upset at that point. Titans potentially, face the Eagles there too. I mean, there's a lot of big games and a lot of easier games in that last stretch, and just depending on how things go down, it can change. So, but Enrique, did you have anything else for the Dallas Cowboys?
No. If you want to take over and get into the Washington Commanders, you could be my guest.
Perfect. Let's fucking do it. So Washington Commanders, you're looking at the general manager being Martin Mayhew, who has been relatively solid so far. He's added some pieces here as we'll go through that are positive. And I mean, obviously not a lot of turmoil in the Commanders organization going on, especially in the last few years. But when it comes to like the internal staff, as far as football is concerned, it seems pretty like okay for the last couple of years, especially when you talk about the head coach, Riverboat Ron Rivera, a very respected coach across the league, longtime coach of the Carolina Panthers, brought them to Super Bowl 50, where they got their brakes beaten off by the Denver Broncos and the remaining like bones of Peyton Manning. Uh, but overall, a very respected coach, and congratulations to him as well. A belated congratulations for beating cancer. I think last year, if not like the beginning of this year. So good for him. But yeah, I mean, overall, when you look at that, like it's the Commanders could be a lot worse off when it comes to their staff, especially a head coach. So moving into their draft class, their first round pick, Jahan Dotson, wide receiver out of Penn State, and kind of a selection that a lot of people turned their heads at initially. The Washington Commanders did trade down in the first round and then picked him, and he apparently was high on their draft board. So they chose him there over some other top wide receivers that, like a lot of people were projecting to go above Jahan Dotson. But a lot of people are really positive on him. I think he's a very instinctive player. He's a yard after catch guy, but he's also got blazing speed, very dynamic, and he seems like a smart kid too. And so we'll have to see how it goes. But I think the organization, especially as they've gotten into rookie OTAs and all that, rookie minicamp and OTAs and all that, he has been what they ordered, what they expected so far. So we'll be excited to see what happens there. We'll look at their wide receiver room a little bit as well. And then at their second pick, second round, number 47, they picked Fidarian Mathis, a defensive tackle out of Bama. Unfortunately, a couple Bama players on this list here. But he's somebody that I didn't know a ton about, but then during this process, looking more into him, he seems like a very he stayed at Alabama for, I think it was 4 or 5 years, so a little bit longer than some in the process to get to the NFL. And he is a leader on that Bama defense. He's a big guy that kind of eats up space in the middle and was very helpful to a lot of those blue chip talents that get all those sacks. Although he didn't necessarily rack up those same numbers as a nose tackle, he's very capable of doing his job. And not only that, but he is, from all accounts, seems like a very good kid, a very good leader in progress, and seems like he may end up being, as we'll talk about a little bit later, kind of the long-term future of that position. So for this team. So, and then their third pick, round 3, number 98, Brian Robinson out of Alabama as well. He's a running back. And interestingly, another player from Alabama that also stayed either 4 or 5 years and just developed. And he did not actually, I think he only has 1 year of production. And he was sitting behind all these other talented backs in Alabama and finally got his chance. And then I think he got I want to say 1,300 yards from scrimmage, and was a really solid contributor for them in this past year here. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely some good depth to add. Round 4, number 113, Percy Butler, a safety out of Louisiana. Add some safety help there that they desperately needed. Round 4, 144, here's one of the bigger ones, Sam Howell, QB out of North Carolina. We'll talk about the quarterback situation in a second, obviously. But yeah, I mean, round 4, you cannot complain about picking who some people thought was the best quarterback in the draft, bar none. And so we'll have to see how he ends up developing. And yeah, I mean, he's definitely an interesting option, potentially long-term for this Commanders team who has been lacking one. So we'll see. Round 5, number 149, Cole Turner, a tight end out of Nevada, needed some tight end help for sure, especially receiving-wise. And that's what he's going to bring Not much of a blocker, it seems like, but he does, receive pretty well and uses his frame well. And then round 7, Chris Paul, no, not the basketball player, but he is a guard out of Tulsa, just a lot bigger of a guard. Yeah, he's obviously some offensive line help there. And then their other 7th round pick, number 240, Christian Holmes, cornerback out of Oklahoma State, backing out or just adding some depth for that cornerback room. And then your key departures for this team throughout the offseason here. So you look at Brandon Scherf, right guard, who signed with the Jaguars. He played 61% of the snaps last year for this team. Landon Collins, a safety who remains unsigned and played 61% as well. Eric Flowers, a left guard, who was also unsigned, played 94%. Obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's a quarterback, retired and moved on to broadcasting now with Amazon. And then Matt Ioannidis, an inside defensive lineman, went over to the Panthers. He played 54%. Adam Humphries, a wide receiver. He's still not signed, and he played 58%. DeAndre Carter, wide receiver, went to the Chargers, and he played 44%. And then finally, Tim Settle, inside defensive lineman, went over to the Bills, and he only played 19%. I don't know why, but for some reason I thought that Tim Settle played more than 19% of the snaps for this Commanders team. But a solid player nonetheless. And yeah, quite a few solid departures for this team throughout this offseason, but they did fill in some of those holes. So moving on to their roster breakdown, starting with the quarterback. Obviously, your starter is Carson Wentz, who you brought over in the offseason from the Colts. It's going to be one of those things. I feel like we've been saying this throughout the offseason a lot for a bunch of different teams. This is going to live and die by the quarterback. I think when we talked about Terry McLaurin and his contract, like I stand with the sentiment that Carson Wentz is like pretty much unarguably the best quarterback that at least Terry McLaurin has had in his career. And so by product, the best quarterback that the Commanders have had in at least 2 or 3 years at this point, just on paper. Even if you're getting the Colts Carson Wentz from last year, who is still mistake prone, but was playing solid football. He wasn't playing great, and he did not show up in the moment where they needed him the most and was inconsistent throughout the season. But it wasn't totally erratic, which is what we saw at the end of his career with the Eagles, where he was just almost unplayable at that point. So he did improve his level of play. Your hope is that he can improve his level of play even further, but this team is just going to live and die by that, and we're just going to have to see how it goes. There's not much else to say on that. You just have to see what he does, and behind him, you do obviously have Taylor Heineke. Your season, if Carson Wentz isn't outplaying Taylor Heineke, your season is dead before it starts. But at the very least, if Carson Wentz gets injured or something like that, Taylor Heineke has proven himself to be a very solid backup option, and they can at least keep the team from losing, and has played well in big moments, which is specifically what Carson Wentz hasn't done in his career thus far. Because you think about what he played 2 playoff games for them, and he played his first playoff game. I think it was his second start, ever, and he played well. He's got that knack for it. Some people do, and some people don't. Thus far, Carson Wentz seems like he does not have that knack, but Taylor Heineke does. So you've got a floor at least there. And then behind them, obviously, your brand new shiny draft pick, Sam Howell out of North Carolina. An interesting option. And like I said, some people thought that he was the top quarterback coming out of the draft. And he's going to need to develop, and ideally you don't want to see him at all this year. But eventually, maybe even next year, he might be the only, you might get rid of Taylor Heineke. He might be your second quarterback on the roster. It depends on what happens with Carson Wentz. I, unfortunately, off the top of my head, don't know how many years Carson Wentz has left on his contract. But, eventually you're going to get to a point where you have to choose, are you paying Carson Wentz or are you bringing in a different veteran, or are you going with Sam Howell? And so you right now, I think the focus is just develop him as much as you can, and do not put him out there if he's not ready. And at least you have Taylor Heineke. I think I look at a lot of these other teams that drafted young guys, and you kind of cringe a little bit when you're thinking about it because, like for instance, the Titans. If Ryan Tannehill does get injured or he plays really badly in the game, like at some point there's going to be the temptation to put Malik Willis out there because they don't have that buffer of a second decent backup that's clearly at this point better than the rookie, and you can put out there in those types of situations and leave the young guy just letting him do his thing and not ruining him too soon. You know what I mean? And I think that that's what Sam Howell needs. So I think he's in a good situation in that sense. Finally, moving off the quarterback room, running back, you're looking at Antonio Gibson, a very solid option. J.D. McKissick, a very good receiving back, or decent receiving back, I should say. And then Brian Robinson out of Alabama, your third-round pick, and Jarrett Patterson. And, working in Carson Wentz's favor is this running game for sure. I think this is the deepest running back room they've had in a while, especially when you talk about Brian Robinson, who could potentially be a feature back at some point in his career, if not pretty quickly. And then you've got J.D. McKissick, who you could probably even put out wide. And he's just a really solid receiving option out of the backfield, which Carson Wentz doesn't historically use that often, but he's there. And then Antonio Gibson, you kind of not do it all, but fairly well-rounded back who's been solid for them when he's on the field. And now with some depth in that room, hopefully that can, stave off those injuries a little bit with him. They do run a fullback as well, which is Alex Arma, one of the better ones in the league. Tight end, you have Logan Thomas, who unfortunately suffered an ACL tear in December, so he's still recovering from that, but one of the better tight ends in the league when he's healthy. Behind him, you have John Bates, and then Turner Cole, your rookie. Turner Cole, I think that especially if Logan Thomas isn't 100% initially, Turner Cole could maybe make an impact. I think really all they're looking for him to do, because John Bates is more of a blocker and they have a blocking tight end. I'm sure they'll try to get Turner Cole to block more, but he historically is not that. In college, he's just not a blocker. But he's got skill on the receiving end, and especially if Logan Thomas isn't at 100%, they're definitely going to need that with this offense. So he might get some snaps pretty early. At wide receiver, you're looking at Terry McLaurin, obviously the big man with the big money, and Curtis Samuel came over from Carolina, I think 2 years ago now. Jahan Dotson, their brand new draft pick out of the first round. Diami Brown, and then Cam Sims and Alex Erickson also coming over from Carolina this offseason. And so I think this is an interesting room because you talk about Terry McLaurin as one of the better wide receivers in the entire league, and will probably play better with Carson Wentz as his quarterback in theory. And then Curtis Samuel has not lived up to the expectations since he's been traded, and I think has dealt with some injury as well. And Jahan Dotson, you're expecting to be a part of this offense pretty quickly. Behind him, Diami Brown is pretty much unproven, but could potentially be a weapon there. But yeah, it does look like Jahan Dotson is expected to be part of this offense. So my problem with this room, looking at it, is that you have almost no big wide receivers, like at all. I think I would have to double check it, unless Terry McLaurin is like just over 6 foot, like 6'1" or something. I don't think that any of these top 4 wide receivers in McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, or Diami Brown are over 6 foot. And so you've got smaller guys running out there, and like they can do a ton of damage, and that's fine, but they're just lacking that big wide receiver presence, that go ball kind of guy, the jump ball kind of guy who can, maybe do a dig in the middle of the field to just be a big target. There's a lot of versatility that they lack without that. And so that's my only question in this wide receiver room. Otherwise, you're looking pretty decent on paper with Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Jahan Dotson and then if De'Ami Brown can be something. So it's a solid room, but with questions leading me to think it's not like one of the best rooms in the league, uh, despite Terry McLaurin being one of the better receivers in the entire league. So moving on to their offensive line here. Left tackle, you have Charles Leno, who they brought back short term, I think just a 1 year contract. Um, and then Cornelius Lucas behind him. Left guard, you have Andrew Norwell, who he brought over from Jacksonville, a solid enough option to replace not Brendan Scherf, but Eric Flowers, who he lost in the offseason. And then behind him, Sadiq Charles and Nolan Laufenberg. And at center, you're looking at Chase Roulier, and then Tyler Larson and Keith Ismail. Solid at center, but not fantastic. Right guard, you brought in Try Turner from Pittsburgh. Solid enough to replace Brandon Scherf, but I do think Scherf is certainly a better option than Try Turner was, or Try Turner is. And Wes Schweitzer behind him, and then Chris Paul, no, not the basketball player, leading out that room. At right tackle, Sam Cosmi, who's been decent. I think first round pick of, I want to say last year, if not like 2019 maybe. But pretty recent here, and he's still developing. John Bates behind him, and then Aaron Montero. And that'll do it for the offense. That offensive line, obviously, you brought in 2 new pieces with Andrew Norwell and Try Turner, and then you're really not. You don't have super solid options when it comes to Charles Leno and Sam Cosmi at the tackle spot, and then Chase Roulier at the center spot. They're kind of just meh. So I think that this honestly might be one of the biggest questions for this roster is what can you get out of this offensive line, and is it enough to let Carson Wentz in this running game do their thing? Because if it isn't, then that's going to stop you dead in your tracks as well. So moving on to the defense here. Well, actually, on the offense, the only other thing I would say is like if you can get the offensive line to be working well, and Carson Wentz is doing his thing, on paper, this is a solid offense. You have the running game there. You have the weapons, especially if Turner Cole can produce early and Logan Thomas comes back well from his ACL injury. You have a solid wide receiver room, if not great. And, you just need that offensive line and Carson Wentz to be good enough. They don't have to be amazing, just good enough. And this can be a good offense. And with this defense that we're going to go through, you don't necessarily have to be a great offense to compete for a playoff spot. So this defense, you're going to base 4-3, so meaning 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers. And then we'll start from the safeties and go down. At free safety, you're looking at Bobby McCain, came over from the Dolphins a year or 2 ago, I believe. And then he's been a solid option there at free safety. Percy Butler, your 4th round pick. And Percy Butler appears to be more of a special teams pick initially that can maybe develop into starting material, or potentially starting material, but at least backup material. Right now, I don't know if you're going to be putting him out there. And then behind him, you have Jeremy Reeves. At strong safety, you have Cameron Curl, and then Derek Forrest and Troy Apke. So obviously wanting a little bit more from that position there. Cornerback, you're looking at Kendall Fuller. William Jackson III came in from the Bengals, if not last year, the year before. And then Benjamin St. Just, a young guy that's still developing. Christian Holmes, your 7th round pick this year. And Danny Johnson, and then Josh Draydon, an undrafted free agent, rounds out that room. So, on the surface, you're pretty solid here. When you talk about Kendall Fuller and William Jackson being your starting 2 quarterbacks, you could be a lot worse off there. And then after that, you start to look a little bit more shaky. Benjamin St. Just has upside, but has not proven himself yet. And then Christian Holmes obviously coming in as a rookie. And the other guys, you'll just have to see what you can get out of. But the first 2 are at least looking solid. At inside linebacker, you have Jamin Davis, their young guy there, Cole Holcomb, and then David Mayo. So those 3 are going to be, like we said, in the 4-3 defense. Those are your projected starters at weak, middle, and strong linebacker there. And so, I think Jamin Davis, obviously you have the upside there, still developing. David Mayo, a little bit more of a veteran and solid enough option, but could look to upgrade there at some point. And yeah, Cole Holcomb, just got to see what you can get out of him. But surrounded by decent enough other guys. Kaliki Hudson behind them, Dijon Harris, and then Milo Eifler. And at your inside defensive line spots, Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, the big boys up front. Obviously, you lose Ioannidis and Settle, who were big parts of this defensive line. And, that's kind of a theme for this team is they've been losing some of those guys, some of those big defensive parts that they've kind of made an identity with just because you can't pay everyone. And Deron Payne, going into the last year of his contract, looks like he may be victim to that as well because they've got to put the money at other places potentially. And that's where Fidarian Mathis behind those two guys comes in, your second round pick from Alabama. It may be a situation, especially if Mathis can develop quickly enough and get some snaps in there, get some good film. Deron Payne may be a free agent that walks next year. So we'll just have to see how that situation plays out. But for now, we've got a little bit of a collection of riches here. You talk about Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, and then the new fresh rookie who looks to be a potential star if he develops right behind them, and then Justin Hamilton behind all those guys, and Tyler Clark to round out that room. So definitely one of the strengths on the roster. At defensive end, you're looking at Chase Young and then Montez Sweat. Obviously, they're other two big stars on that defense, and not a whole lot to complain about there. Correct me if you know Enrique, but I feel like Sweat's contract might be coming up too because I don't think he's been paid yet. And Chase Young still got at least 3 years, but he was a first round pick though, so probably 4. But yeah, I mean, a solid room there for sure. Behind them, James Smith Williams, and then F.A. Obata was a contributor with the Bills there. Casey Toohill, and then Daniel Wise and Shaka Tony rounding out that room. So some very solid guys at the top of that, and then some upside guys behind them. Definitely that defensive line, the most talented part of this Commanders roster. And then at special teams, you're looking at kicker, Joey Sly, and then punter, Tress Way. Not a whole lot to complain about there. Those guys have been fairly consistent, if not, not like amazing, but doing their jobs. Storyline wise, first one is, can Carson Wentz take you to the promised land? And I mean, we talked about this before, everything's going to ride on him and how well he can play. It's worth noting that he's learning a different scheme than he's used to. And so although this scheme may fit him better, he does have to learn and does have to, adjust to that, as well as new teammates and new everything. Once again, coming over from the Colts. And so, we'll just have to see how that ends up. At number 2, they have a tough middle stretch. Those are my schedule thoughts. At number 2, we have, can this defense overcome underperforming last year to help this team get firmly in the playoffs? And, I mentioned a little bit, this defense is good enough to carry this team to playoff contention, but they have to play that way. Obviously, you saw them do that in 2020. They played really well, got the Commanders into the playoffs, even with Taylor Heineke at the helm there, and played well. And then 2021, they took a step back, obviously losing some parts of that roster, but did take a step back nonetheless. If they can rebound this year, could be a lot better for them. Number 3, they do have lack of depth in some key spots. For me, that comes to the wide receiver. So you're talking about Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Jahan Dotson. But then behind them, we talked about just not a lot of proven guys. De'Ami Brown, Cam Sims, and Alex Erickson. Not a lot of proven production there behind your top 3 wide receivers. And you're lacking that size that we talked about as well. Cornerback room, obviously, like we said, you talked about those 2 big guys in Kendall Fuller and William Jackson III. But then behind them, Benjamin St. Just and Christian Holmes and all those guys. you are, looking for them to step up as young guys for sure. And then, safety, you're talking about Bobby McCain being the most solid name in that both free safety and strong safety. Other than that, you're looking at the rookie and Percy Butler, who's going to be more of a special teams guy initially, probably. Jeremy Reeves, Cameron Curl is your other starter, Derek Forrest, and Troy Aki. That definitely could use an upgrade in the safety room. And then inside linebacker, you talk about Jamin Davis and David Mayo, your young guy and your veteran, leading out that room, and then everybody else relatively unproven. And, finally, the offensive line. And we talked about that really may be, other than Carson Wentz, the biggest question for that offense. And if they can't sustain a level of play that's going to keep Carson Wentz and that running game comfortable, then this offense isn't going anywhere. So, yeah, I mean, with that, Enrique, what are your thoughts on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say about this roster is, although it does have talent on it, I do worry about Carson Wentz a little bit. Obviously, I mean, I do recognize that he has talent. I do recognize that at one time, he was honestly like an MVP candidate for how he was playing out in Philadelphia, and he received a huge contract and has been moved. Now this is his third team that he's played for. And if I'm being honest with you, I do think that this is kind of like his last straw as far as being a starting quarterback and being a starting quarterback that, can win some games. I really do think that, this Washington Commanders team, has enough talent on the roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to make some noise. We just need to see, that happen. And I think Carson Wentz is a big factor in how successful they're going to be, obviously, with being their starting quarterback. So, yeah, and I mean, the Colts, the Colts were kind of let down by him last year. So he's definitely looking to kind of maximize his potential and maximize his chance there, getting another chance to be a starting quarterback, with the Washington Commanders. So yeah, I'm excited to see Chase Young. I'm excited to see some of this defense again. I think the defense could be killer, especially if Chase Young's able to come back healthy. But yeah, I think it's a good enough roster.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And like you said, it's all just going to depend on Carson Wentz there. So with that, we can go right into the schedule. Their 2021 record was 7-10. So obviously hoping to do better than that. But and 7-10 is pretty impressive with Taylor Heineke for pretty much the entire season, to be fair. So, but and the defense underperforming as well. So, but anyways, for this year's schedule, Week 1, you're versus the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. I have that as a win. Week 2 is at the Detroit Lions. I have that as a win. Week 3 versus the Philadelphia Eagles at home, win. And I do have them splitting with Philadelphia, obviously. I think that is something that, depending on how good the Eagles are, or I guess vice versa, I think it's more likely that the Eagles are better than the Commanders than it is that the Commanders are better than the Eagles. But I do think that's one of those ones where if one of those two teams separates, they could sweep the other. But I do have them splitting. And then Week 4 at Dallas Cowboys, I have that as a loss. Week 5 versus the Tennessee Titans, I have that as a loss. But that's a big game, and I hesitated with giving that a loss because, as we've talked about the Tennessee Titans, you are relying on a young receiver to get good and to be, produce pretty quickly, especially when you're facing the Washington Commanders here at Week 5. And so we don't necessarily know what exactly the Tennessee Titans are going to look like. But for that matter, at this point in the offseason, it's hard to predict what any of the teams are necessarily going to look like. So, I have that as a loss, but I also have that as a big game for them. They could go either way. Week 6 at Chicago Bears. This is a Thursday game. but I do have it as a win. And I also have that as a big game because of the fact that it is on Thursday. You have that short week right after the Tennessee Titans game, which, even if the wide receiving core isn't doing their thing, you still have Derrick Henry to contend with. So it's not necessarily a pushover game, even at the Tennessee Titans' worst, and they still have a good defense as well. So coming off a bigger game, going right into which should be an easier game against the Bears, but on a Thursday. So we'll have to see. Week 7, they're versus the Green Bay Packers at home. I have that as a loss. Week 8, at Indianapolis against the Colts. I have that as a loss as well. Week 9 versus the Vikings at home. I have that as a win. Week 10 at the Eagles. I have that one as a loss, obviously splitting there. Week 11 at Houston Texans. I have that as a win. Week 12 versus the Atlanta Falcons is a win as well. Week 13 at the New York Giants. I have that as a win. And then week 14 is your bye week. Week 15 at the New York Giants, versus the New York Giants. That is a win as well. So sweeping the Giants. Week 16 at San Francisco 49ers. I have this as a win and a big game as well. Again, one of those ones, and we've said this on other predictions, we just don't necessarily know what the 49ers are going to be. They could be trotting out Jimmy Garoppolo at this point again. You know what I mean? And so it could be Trey Lance. We don't know how good Trey Lance is going to be. Does Jimmy Garoppolo get traded like before the trade deadline, which is week 8, and you're playing them in week 16? And so, at that point, are you with Trey Lance? Well, we just have no idea at this point what exactly is going to be the situation leading into, especially a week 16 game. But as far as the rosters right now, and I have that as a win for the Commanders. And then week 17, they're versus the Cleveland Browns. I have that as a loss if Deshaun is there, and a win if Deshaun isn't there. And then week 18, finishing it off, you are versus the Dallas Cowboys. I have that as a win, splitting with the Dallas Cowboys. And again, another one where the Cowboys could potentially sweep the Commanders. I don't know that the Commanders are very likely to sweep the Dallas Cowboys, but in some universe, I'm sure it happens. But I think that for me, like I said, those teams, you have Dallas Cowboys, Washington Commanders, and then the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think all three of those are going to be contending for number 1 in this division, potentially, just depending on how their situations play out. And especially with the Commanders, how Carson Wentz and that offensive line, plays out throughout the season. But for now, I have them splitting with both the Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. So overall, my record prediction, I have them at 11-6 if Carson and the defense play well, and if not, I have them at 9-8. And so the reasoning for that, you overall have kind of an easy schedule. I mean, we were talking about it with these other NFC East teams. You have a lot of easier games. No offense to the Giants, but the Giants are easy games. And you have a bye week separating them too. You get to come back home, take your bye week, and then face the Giants second time in a row. And then, you're talking about you have Houston, you have Atlanta. The Vikings are not necessarily an easy game, but they're not a hard game either. Just one of those ones. You're talking about Chicago Bears, even though they're on a Thursday. And then you open up the season with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Detroit Lions, which is, one of my schedule thoughts here. You start off with Jacksonville and Detroit. In theory, you can get the ball rolling on your wins there. Start strong if Carson Wentz is playing well. And then your first test is going to be week 3 against those Eagles. And it starts to get a little tougher from there. And you have that tough middle stretch, talking about facing the Eagles twice, then the Cowboys once, the Titans, the Packers, and the Colts. So that's really where it gets tougher. But yeah, I mean, you ease off a little bit towards the end, then you get those Giants games. Maybe the 49ers is a difficult game, just depending. They have a good roster, but obviously the quarterback situation. And then, a little bit harder towards that end. But overall, really not that bad of a schedule, and it plays in their favor. It just depends on Carson. So Enrique, what are your thoughts on the schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think that the Commanders have a pretty favorable schedule as far as some of the teams they have to play. But I think like your big game against the Titans in Week 5 that you have circled here, I think that is a huge game. But the thing that I would say is the biggest surprising factor for me about the schedule is how late their bye week is, all the way
Yeah,
down there at Week 14. And that could be a good and a bad thing, depending on how the season's going. If you're having a really good season, late bye week, could be really nice. Gives you like an extra week, especially, as you're getting towards the end of the season where your guys might be beat up. That could be like a pivotal bye week, because if, maybe someone's hurt, you can rest them that week, get them back the week after. But also, the thing about a late bye week like that as well is, sometimes a bye week can kind of stop the slide of a bad season as well.
yeah,
Sometimes you're losing a few games in a row, your bye week comes, kind of stops that. You're able to turn that around. So with having your bye week all the way down in Week 14, it kind of prevents you being able to do that. But I do agree. I do think that the games that you have them losing, I think are well deserved. I do think that Carson has some talent, and I do think that I'm hoping that he's able to unleash that with the Commanders this year. Because I mean, who wants to see a bad football team ever? I don't want to see bad football. I'd love to see if the Commanders were a viable threat. I don't necessarily think without him playing, are they a viable threat? So I think we should root for Carson to have a strong season. That way we can get awesome divisional football come, playoff time, and et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah,
but I mean, the last few weeks of the season, I think could be very pivotal for them as well, because you got the Giants, who are a division rival. You got the 49ers. That's a huge game in Week 16, because, I mean, honestly, two NFC teams could be, about playoff seeding at that point. So that's a huge game, especially if you can take out such a threat in the 49ers. Like the 49ers are a playoff threat next year. And depending on how good Trey Lance is, they could be a very highly touted NFC rival coming in. And if you have to play them late in the season, it could be a good and a bad thing, And then the Cleveland Browns, I don't personally think they're going to have Deshaun. So I do think that this is probably going to be a win for them. But yeah, I mean, it just depends. Also, maybe the Browns figure something else out as far as quarterback wise, to give them a little bit more of a viable threat as far as quarterbacks go. But if it's going to be Jacoby Brissett coming out there starting for the Browns, like I think it's going to be, then I think that the Commanders can get it done.
yeah,
And then, yeah, obviously, I think that if Carson plays his best football, the team could compete with the Eagles and with the Cowboys right there in the NFC East. So I'm just wondering if they can take advantage of a pretty decent schedule, and if Carson can just have a MVP comeback type of year. So if he's able to do that and take advantage of the schedule, I think that the Commanders should be good. But yeah, dude.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you brought up a lot of great thoughts, especially with the bye week. I think that's a great point. Is if your season is going a good way, a late bye week is nice for the playoffs, and if it's not going so great, it's kind of nice to have it earlier and give you a break earlier in the season and maybe stop a slide of losing some games. So that'll be an interesting thing to see how it plays out. And as we talked about, and you just talked about as well, it's just going to depend on Carson Wentz, because this team is going to live and die by the quarterback play. And I think if he can at least just be Colts Carson Wentz, you know what I mean? This defense really does have the capability and the offensive talent around Carson Wentz, apart from the offensive line, does have the capability to do decent things. When you talk about 7-10, that's a better record than the Denver Broncos with more talent on the roster, in my opinion. As a Denver Broncos fan, got with that roster and Teddy Bridgewater, and they did it with Taylor Heineke. You know what I mean? Like, so that's a testament to not only the strength of the defense, but also the talent of Antonio Gibson and Terry McLaurin and like Logan Thomas and some of those offensive weapons that have outplayed, and especially in Terry McLaurin's case, outplayed the quarterback play and offensive line play that they have been given. So, yeah, we're just going to have to see how it goes. But I do genuinely think because of the strength of the roster around Carson, even if he's not playing amazing, this roster can probably pull out a lot of those easier games and still get you a decent record. You just may not go anywhere in the playoffs. So if you want actual contending chances, that's where you need Carson Wentz to be playing. Yeah, we'll just have to see. So I think that is going to do it for this part of today's show. Join us on the Mile High Fight Show, episode 6, as we jump into the fight night, headlined by Rafael Dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. With that, this has been the Mile High Fight Show, and we'll see you guys next week.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.